Hello and welcome. You're watching the Global Reset on CNBC TV 18 Prime with me, Prashant Nair. This is the program where we try and analyze trends, markets, economies, and of course get you expert insights. A lot is happening as far as the shifting world order goes. Joining us in a short bit to talk about all of this is Rachel Ziemba. She's founder of Ziemba Insights. Rachel is an American economist and political risk expert specializing in macroeconomic and geopolitical issues. But before I get Rachel into the conversation, and that's in just a bit from now, as always, let me quickly get you up to speed with what has happened on the global front over the last 12 hours or so. So, of course, on Friday, the U.S. Appeals Court had ruled that U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs are illegal, but had allowed the tariffs to remain in place through October. The deadline was the 14th of October. This was in order to give the administration a chance to file an appeal with the Supreme Court. Now, last night, President Trump has said that his administration will ask the Supreme Court for an expedited ruling on tariffs within the next 24 hours. He, of course, said that without tariffs, it's going to be a disaster, and that stock markets and financial markets love tariffs and would really it would be disastrous without tariffs. So, as always, President Trump kind of sort of building this issue up. Listen and let's just play those sound bites out.
You know, other countries use tariffs on us for years, and we never did. I did a lot during my first term, but then we had COVID and we had to focus on other things. You couldn't be tariffing Italy, Spain, France, as they were dying by the thousands and millions. It's a very important decision. And frankly, if they make the wrong decision, it would be a devastation for our country. We've taken in trillions of dollars. And by the way, all these countries signed agreements. As an example, they're all happy. Everybody's happy. But some whack job put in a lawsuit, and now it's going to the Supreme Court. Now, we're going to be asking for early admittance. We're going tomorrow, and we're going to ask for an expedited ruling because, you know, when you look at the stock market's down today, the stock market's down because of that, because the stock market needs the tariffs. They want the tariffs.
Okay, well, stock markets want the tariffs. That's from President Trump. The U.S. president also commented on high tariffs imposed on India. He said that the two countries got along very well, but also listed why India was being charged a high tariff, 50%. Listen.
We get along with India very well, but India has, you have to understand, for many years it was a one-sided relationship. Only now, since I came along, and because of the power that we have with tariffs, India was charging us tremendous tariffs, about the highest in the world. They were about the highest in the world, number one. And we, therefore, weren't doing much business with India, but they were doing business with us because we weren't charging them. Foolishly, we weren't charging them. So they would send in massive, you know, everything they made, they'd send it in, pour it into our country. Therefore, it wouldn't be made here, you know, which is a negative. But we would not send in anything because they were charging us 100% tariffs. And, you know, I'll give you an example. Harley Davidson. Harley Davidson couldn't sell into India. There was a 200% tariff on a motorcycle. So what happens? Harley Davidson went to India and built a motorcycle plant. And now they don't have to pay tariffs. Same thing as us.
As promised, let us get talking to Rachel Ziemba, founder of Ziemba Insights. Rachel, great to speak with you. Thank you very much for your time. Let me begin by asking you, what are the U.S. secondary tariffs on India really about, according to you? Is it about Russian oil purchases, which, of course, is what and how this is being framed? Or do you think there are some other issues which are equally, if not, as some would say, more important?
Thank you for having me. I think if we look at it, I think we have the Trump administration asking for a couple of things. They, if anything, I think they're less focused on really putting pressure on Russia and more on what they view as trade grievances with India. We have advisors like Peter Navarro coming out and complaining about India's own tariffs towards U.S. goods, which have historically been high, but not anywhere near as high as these new sort of U.S. tariffs. And we also have, we also have this confluence of this pressure on India coming at the same time where Trump wants to seem like he's being tough on Russia. at the same time where in practice, Trump has not been very tough on Russia. There have been no new economic pressures on Russia from the US for this Trump administration. And they've held in place all the measures from the Biden administration. And I do think they're trying to send a message to other countries that might trade with Russia. But at the end of the day, there probably would be many more efficient ways to try to put economic pressure on Russia. And as we see, how is India likely to respond? I think their officials would look to be making a deal, but I also think that they'll continue to buy what supplies are relatively price competitive. And if anything, the tariffs, secondary tariffs, have reduced the cost of Russian oil for India rather than increasing it.
Rachel, so what you're saying is that is the big one for the U.S. is the high tariffs that India imposes on imports, which President Trump has talked about as well. And maybe it's about Russian oil, but not so much, I mean, as it's being made out to be.
I think that's a big part of it. I think the other thing that has gotten the attention of the Trump administration is the fact that India is the only country that significantly increased its purchases of Russian fuel in the last 3 years. Countries like Turkey and China have increased their purchases, but there's not been the same big swing. And the Trump administration has never really been a fan of the Biden administration policy of the oil price cap, believing that it gave financial benefits to India and China, countries that could buy Russian oil cheap and resell it at global prices in the refined form. So I do think there is a Trump administration concern that the war continues and they'd like to put pressure on Russia, but I think they're doing it in a very inefficient manner by only focusing on India, and not trying to, for example, tighten up financial sanctions or close or coordinate with the Europeans to close loopholes. So I do think that the timing of it and the focus on India as opposed to other trading partners of Russia, highlights to me that it's also about U.S.-India trade relations that go beyond Russia.
Rachel, the reason there is skepticism about the real reason behind the secondary tariffs is a simple question, right? China is the biggest purchaser of Russian oil, but India has been targeted. So how does that make sense?
Correct. Correct. And, in the last in the last 24 hours, we've seen news that China is set to buy even more Russian fuel if we go out many years. They've just done a political agreement on this long stalled Power of Siberia 2 natural gas pipeline. We'll see if it actually happens. We'll see if the Chinese and Russians can agree on price. But yes, China is the largest trading partner, the largest purchaser of oil, gas, coal, metals. Um, I think there are a couple of factors here. One is that the Trump administration wants to do a deal with China right now. They are looking to increase U.S. exports to China. They're not being very effective at it, or they're not finding much luck. The Chinese are still reluctant to buy US energy, US LNG. The Chinese have their own tariffs on the import of US energy products. And the Chinese are wary about the chips that the US would like to sell to them, concerned that there may be spyware and other factors installed. And they're probably right about that. So I think the Trump administration wants to do deals with different countries. These competing interests come to play here. Where China's concerned, the Trump administration also has the example of what happened back in April when US tariffs on Chinese goods and Chinese tariffs on American goods kept going up and up and up. There was almost a sudden stop in bilateral trade. So I think there are officials who are concerned about a rerun of that, who would like to see an increase in US exports to China. And so I think they have looked to India as a way to send a message. And as I say, it's coming at the same times where the US India trade talks not relating to Russia ran aground. And so I think this comes together in this way, but it does undermine several administrations worth of effort from on the U.S. side to have closer ties with India, to detach, to reduce the India-Russia relationship, which is longstanding from India's time as a non-aligned nation, and really calls into question some of the U.S. relationships in the Indo-Pacific.
Rachel, the other question, of course, is how do U.S. officials look at attempts by India and China to repair relations with each other? I mean, this is happening after 5 years. Are they concerned or not really? Do they see this as sort of, just a thing which is happening now and maybe a little tactical, but perhaps not a durable repair of relations? How are U.S. officials viewing this?
I think some in the administration are definitely looking on with concern, and will have been concerned about this outreach that has occurred. And that's where I've been surprised to see the relative lack of comments from Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Marco Rubio, who has a lot of experience in dealing with India. Others, I think, are very much focused. This is a different U.S. administration where trade policy is concerned, and they will be, really focused on, on resetting the global trade terms. Overall, I think we will likely eventually see some kind of agreement between the U.S. and India that de-escalates. But there will be damage to the relationship. As to India and China, I think you're right. There's definitely been a warming. We maybe are moving beyond some of the very extensive. They're looking for opportunities to work together. There's still a lot of competition as well as the strategic and territorial concerns. India is still looking to take more of China's market share on the manufacturing side. And India is facing this challenge where it's a major trading partner, the United States, is no longer interested in China plus one strategies. The US is really looking for the relocation of production back to the United States. And so for India, they are looking for different other partners. I think they'll also continue to leverage market access and trade relationships through countries like the United Arab Emirates, that are also a pathway to other trade relationships. We'll see how far it goes with China. We are just coming off this quite rhetorically successful Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting that set out new rules for an alternate world order. There's probably a little less there than some market commentators would say. But ultimately, I think India is going to continue to try to hedge, continue to find economic and security partnerships where they can. But there's some difficult sort of roads ahead once you get to the details. At this time where China is really exporting a lot more manufactured goods than it's importing. And a lot of its trading partners are running up against those surpluses.
Well, that's very well explained, Rachel. We'll slip into a quick commercial break here. Don't go anywhere. We're going to continue our conversation with Rachel Ziemba on the other side. A lot more to talk about. Welcome back. You're watching the Global Reset. We're in conversation with Rachel Ziemba, founder of Ziemba Insights, somebody who sort of studies geopolitics, macroeconomics, and provides a blend of both to give a view to you as an investor in terms of how you should be thinking about things from here on. Rachel, thanks for waiting. If you were to put a timeline to it, you said eventually this is going to get worked out. We've heard this from Scott Bessent as well, that this is going to get worked out. How long do you think before these secondary 25% tariffs are done away with? A matter of weeks, a month, 2 months, 6 months? What timeline would you put to it?
Yeah, it's hard to predict, particularly with this administration. I think it is a matter of months rather than weeks. At the moment, I think these secondary tariffs are linked to two things. One, any progress in the overarching trade agreement, which is the initial 25%, but also to any signs of ceasefire or end of violence of Russia's war in Ukraine. The latter, and in progress, in practice, I don't think we're seeing a lot of movement on either of those discussions. The first, maybe I'm a little more optimistic on the first than the second, the Russia related ones, especially as Congress comes back into session and there's more concern about whether the recent US government policies are actually bringing India closer to China rather than the reverse. So we could see some progress there, but I do think we're talking about a matter of this could be something that Indian and US businesses will have to grapple with for several months.
Rachel, once these tariffs are done away with, as you said they will, do you think we'll get back to more normal trade negotiations because that 25% will still remain? Or do you think this experience, this rather antagonistic experience, has damaged US-India relations in a more permanent kind of way? The damage will remain.
Yeah, I think it does have durable relations because and again, this is not going to be the only trade dispute that the U.S. and India face. The 50% tariffs seem very high, but there are actually some very important exemptions that are in place right now that actually limit the sort of total weighted average of the tariffs that are being charged on Indian goods. Important products like pharmaceuticals are exempt from some of the tariffs, and there's still pharmaceuticals are still an area where sectoral tariffs are likely. So India is likely trying to negotiate on those grounds. So again, even if there is some sort of resolution on the secondary tariffs or reduction, um, we could see other tariffs coming into the mix. The U.S. administration has really changed how they think about India's production potential as part of its as part of U.S. company global footprint. We had, as part of the first Trump administration's tariffs, we had this really rerouting, relocation, shifting of global value chains to especially Southeast Asia, but to some extent South Asia. And India was a beneficiary of that, adding to the trade that was already being developed. I think this Trump administration is much more concerned about transshipment and this redirection of trade. And this US administration likes the revenue. The revenue coming in from these tariffs is small in comparison to the US debt, but it's growing. And so I think a number of the elements of tariffs are here to stay. But you asked an important question about the strategic relationship, and I do think that there's been damage done. This is a U.S. government that is much more transactional. They'll work with countries, but they'll work with them in perhaps more of a one-off manner. And I think they're less focused on trying to just develop new allied relationships, perhaps, than the Biden administration was. So, look, I think that the inward shifts on trade policy, on economic policy, on concern about India's relations with Russia. I think all of this will be a concern in Washington beyond the Trump administration. But I would really be watching for cues as as Congress is back, as sort of the summer is over, about what a sort of reset could look like. But I don't think it's going to go back to the sort of more friendly relations that maybe characterized some of the developments here. And that's, I think, also implications on groupings like the Quad. I'm not saying that it will stop Japan or Australia from having close ties with India, but this U.S. government really came in wanting to use groups like the Quad to move forward on a lot of strategic interests, including vis-a-vis China and isolating China. And I do think everything that's happened has raised questions about the viability of that policy.
No, absolutely. Point taken, Rachel. Uh, you know, just very briefly, if you will, you said sectoral tariffs, especially on things like pharma, of a lot of interest here in India. It is still coming, you're saying, because we've kind of sort of forgotten about it. We'd focused on this 50%, this additional 25, but you're saying sectoral tariffs are still coming on things like pharma.
I think it is the sectoral tariffs. I mean, Trump has had some very mixed statements on pharmaceuticals. Are one of those very important to India, but there are also ones down the line. Another one very important is the semiconductor ones. And while India doesn't produce semiconductors, it produces electronic products that include them. And so I'm thinking about iPhones and the like. If anything, the news at the end of last week, where an appeals court invalidated the emergency powers based tariffs of the Trump administration, maybe makes the sectoral tariffs even more important as a policy tool. So, all of this is to say that if you're involved in import export trade into the US, your life remains very complicated, and that maybe the only one some of these dynamics are really good for are the lawyers that are helping people navigate some of these difficult circumstances, and of course any actors that benefit from disruption and uncertainty.
Rachel, final question on the legality of these tariffs, right? I mean, they were judged by the U.S. Federal Appeals Court as illegal. And this has to go to the Supreme Court. We heard President Trump last night saying that he's going to expedite the matter to get a ruling. Now, if the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court also rules these tariffs illegal, what do you think happens? Some believe that the tariffs as a strategy are central to this administration and they will find a workaround. Basically use other sections like 301, 308, etc. Maybe more cumbersome to use as compared to the emergency powers under which these tariffs were levied. But the tariffs will remain even if the Supreme Court, the top court, rules them illegal. Would you agree?
I think they will for some of them, maybe a little challenging. The sectoral tariffs that I mentioned, they're based on a different legal authority, and that's on much sounder legal basis. Those were powers actually granted to the administration by Congress, and so I think those will stand, and those may actually be even more important. We also could see other tariffs. We could see use of Section 301. We could see other dynamics. What is really, I think, a legal challenge to the Trump administration is the basis for these reciprocal tariffs and these broad-based tariffs across countries. It is much more difficult for the U.S. to apply tariffs to many countries across all sectors if the Supreme Court rules that this use of the Emergency Powers Act is not cannot be extended to tariffs, and that's something that we'll know in probably and by the middle of October. I would think it's definitely true. You're completely right. The U.S. government is getting used to this tariff revenue. They're getting used to the politics of the tariff revenue, offering to extend tariffs to revenue to pay for other things. Now, of course, just like you get used to tax cuts, the tax cuts are a big hole in the U.S. Deficit, and so even this higher tariff revenue doesn't patch the gap in a meaningful way. So yeah, looking forward, I think it's hard to say exactly where the Supreme Court will rule, but it's likely that some of the tariff powers at least would remain in place, as well as the ones that the Trump administration already has. And the Trump administration has been framing this threat, the threat to their tariff authorities, as if it's the end of the United States, as if the whole economy will collapse if its tariff authority is not granted. That seems very hyperbolic. But it's possible that some members of the Supreme Court will be more sympathetic to that, and they might just narrow the authorities, sort of, if at all. But as ultimately, this is an administration that believes that tariffs are a good way to raise revenue, believes that this is a part of the approach, and so they'll likely find another way. And so those who are rejoicing after Friday's news should remember not only that tariffs continue to be collected in the interim, and but also that there are likely other ways to reconfigure the tariffs if necessary. This is an administration that believes strongly in tariffs, tariff revenue. But I would be on India's case in particular. I would be watching for uh, some degree of recalibration as the Trump administration realizes that the additional tariffs on India are almost as high as the additional tariffs they've put in place, or actually higher, the additional tariffs they've put in place on China.
Well, that's an exhaustive conversation. Rachel, thank you very much for sharing your views with us. Really a pleasure, and hope you come back in the program to discuss important developments as we track Trump's tariffs, especially with an eye on what perhaps gets worked out in the case of India. As you said, it'll get negotiated lower, tough to put timelines on this one. Well, it's a wrap on this edition of the Global Reset. Thank you very much for watching. More coming up on the other side.